Well, maybe you just describe your observations and this specific situation that we created there. And what did you observe? What is the outcome of this unconditioned? I think.
Yeah. First, I have to qualify by saying that this is not a very healthy nest. But of course, as a ethologist, I'm interested also in unhealthiness, as long as it's so, because nests die, and one
Is
would
it
also like to
pathological?
understand what happens when they die. So I observed, for example, that there is no brood, there are no eggs, larvae, and pupae, which already demotivates the adults, not only from working but also from cooperating. And in fact, in such a situation, they are motivated to look for other options. Can I leave? Is there a better place I can go to? Or can I start my own nest? So, even though the food was provided, they were not taking it because normally they take the food for the larvae. There are no larvae. And there was one individual which was permanently sitting in the nest, on the nest. That may be the queen, but we cannot be sure till we actually see the eggs. So in that sense, this was what we would call a nest in decline. And if we keep the doors of the cage open, my prediction is that in a day or two they will leave. But if you keep the doors closed and force them to stay and feed them, etc., then they might sort of start all over again. That is the diagnosis of this particular nest. Because normally I study very healthy nests, hundreds of larvae, lots of pupae, lots of activity, lots of interaction. So this is a nest in decline.
But maybe, so we could say it's in a critical state, yeah, in a decisive state, that the option to stay might be true or to leave.
In a sense, yes. However, what we observe, and this is somewhat frustrating to us, we always observe that the decline is extremely gradual. Unless there is a catastrophe, there is a big predator attack or there's a big storm or something. But natural decline is extremely slow. Sometimes can take weeks or months. We know it's declining. It's like a patient. We know he's going to die, but he's not. So he stays in coma for months and months and months. So these nests sometimes remain like for a very long time. And that's not surprising because in a situation like this, they also don't have many other options because maybe they're old, and so they don't have many other options. So it's a very slow phase. So normally when we say critical phase, we expect it to be short. This is very, very slow. The decline is usually very slow.
We are dealing with this critical zone in this project. So we also are dealing, as we did in the workshop, with the term of criticality.
Mm-hmm.
So critical moments for scientists might be the interesting one because they are turning points.
Yes.
So from an observational point of view, how would you define the term critical?
Okay, so the most interesting critical phase for these colonies, well, certainly interesting for us and I think also interesting for the wasps, is when one queen is overthrown or voluntarily relinquishes and a new queen takes over. That's a very interesting phase. And that's the one we have been studying for many years. This doesn't happen very often. It doesn't happen when we want it to happen. So we simulate it. We go and remove the queen and to see how the next queen takes over. But we also have spent many, many hours, many, many students, waiting to see whether we can witness the natural situation. And we have seen, I think, about at least 10 to 20 natural events. We have seen hundreds of simulated events, of course. And there, again, it's a bit variable, but it happens usually in a very short period of time, 1 or 2 days. Sometimes the workers, especially the potential queen, detects that the old queen is declining and challenges her. And quickly the old queen loses and then there is a transition. Sometimes maybe the new queen is not really ready and requires some more time. So she's not challenging the old queen, even though the old queen is declining. But we see sometimes that the old queen provokes the new one by walking off. It's your nest. Ready or not, take care of it. I'm leaving. She basically walks off. So that's the second kind of situation. There are other most interesting situations when the old queen thinks I am still good, and the new one says I am better than you, and then they fight. And this thing we have studied in some detail. So there it depends on the relative strengths. So we have seen situations where after an encounter, the new one realizes, you are right, you are still good, so I'm going back to work. Or the old one realizes, you are much better than I thought, so I better leave. And once again, there is this intermediate thing where each one thinks they are better than the other, then they fight. They can even kill each other, in fact, at that stage. One of them can even die.
Talking about the global and the terrestrial and the new search movement by Bruno Latour, who has been also a visitor of the CCS.
Yes.
So Latour is criticizing the global, as he says, this is representing modernity, or this is very close to a modern concept. Mm-hmm. Then he says there are now political movements who are very much going back to the old land, like Modi or Trump, who promise we set up borders again,
Yes.
We believe in nations, and we want to have it as it was before. And Latour proposes that as a third search movement, we have to become terrestrial. And Donna Haraway is also talking about finding a new approach towards the terra, that we are living on. I think I would assume you as a terrestrial person, because you told me that 40 years ago you had the decision either to become a molecular biologist and go to the US, which would have been a modern global
Yes.
decision,
Yes.
but you decided to remain in India and to look for an object which is of your interest, and that was the wasp.
Yes.
So that is a terrestrial attitude. And it's also a decision for observation. Yeah?
But I must say a little bit that I cheated a little bit, because I believed that what I am choosing may look not so modern today, but will be the real modern tomorrow. And maybe I will help make it. So it's not so much rejection of modernity, but my desire to create a new modernity. So I'm not against modernity, but I would like to be the creator and not just the person enjoying what somebody else has already created. I always tell my students that the best strategy in science is to find a field that is not fashionable and make it fashionable. The normal tendency is to find what is fashionable and jump on the bandwagon, which
And
is
hundreds others
which
do.
is very counterproductive, and I don't know why so many people automatically do this. Everybody does it. The funding agencies tell you, the journals tell you, professors tell you, oh, this is a hot area, get into it. And I say, this is a hot area. No longer. Let's do something which is not hot and make it hot. That is what I think we should be doing. And so it was a little bit in that spirit. But observation, yes, and that certainly was very important. And if you can give me a few minutes, I want to flag one issue about observation, which is there is a lot of debate among scientists how to observe nature. There's one school of thought which says that there is no use in just observing. You must have questions in mind, you must have theories in mind, hypotheses in mind. Only then observation is useful, otherwise you're not a scientist. There's another school which says that if you have questions and theories and hypotheses, you're already biased. You must find out what is out there in nature with a completely open mind. with a blank slate. It would appear that these two are completely contradictory positions, and they have been treated as contradictory positions. And there's a lot of debate. The truth is that you actually need both of them. So I am not saying the usual cliche that the truth is somewhere in between. No, no, no. These are two extremes, but you have to practice them alternately. You have to spend some time observing nature with a blank slate. No questions, no hypotheses, no expectations. Just observe. From that, you then construct questions and hypotheses and theories. Now you go back and look at nature with this in mind. But you shouldn't do it for too long. Then you again turn around and say, now I'm going to observe without any questions. So you have to alternate between these two states of observation. Both are very important in science. Neither of them is wrong nor right. Both are important, but you cannot do them at the same time. You must do them one after the other in repeated cycles.
Either or, yes.
But in repeated cycles,
Yeah.
you go from one to the other.
Mhm.
That's the real trick in
Now you have a relation. You set up a professional relation to that species of a wasp, Opalidia marginata, and so in a way you made kin, like Donna Haraway would say,
Yes.
or companionship, species
Yes.
companionship, or maybe kind of a symbiogenesis.
Yes.
I don't know. How would you describe your personal relation towards that species and its individuals?
Today it is very fashionable in evolutionary biology to speak of kinship as the proportion of genes shared. But this is a very recent and a very artificial concept. Kinship simply means familiarity, liking, resemblance. You can feel kinship to plants. You can feel kinship to your computer. So the original meaning of kinship is not genetic relatedness. And what is ironical is that even when it is genetic relatedness, it turns out that in most cases nobody measures genetic relatedness. They measure familiarity. They measure whom they like and they don't like. So throughout the animal and plant kingdom and human species, kinship has always been through what you might call a proxy. In some cases that may be a proxy for genetic relatedness. Other cases it is just for familiarity. In that sense you can have kinship towards anything. And I've been observing these wasps for a very long time now, almost 50 years. First as a hobby, then as a profession. And I would say I feel the greatest kinship certainly to this species than to any other species of living organism, leaving out humans. But even when it comes to humans, except my very close family and my students, I feel greater kinship to the wasps than to other human beings. This has obviously nothing to do with genetic relatedness. It is familiarity, it is something that you like, something that you want to be close to.
That you know, yeah, in a way.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
This again has pros and cons. There are people who believe that you should never get very emotionally close to the organism you're studying because you'll be biased. And others feel that unless you really feel that, you don't really understand anything. Again, I think these are not two opposites, they're not two rights and wrong. You must be able to combine both of these
but
things.
to leave it as an opposite as well.
Yes,
not to
leave it
mix
as an
yeah.
opposite, but
Yeah,
is
it reflected. And,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Mhm. The critical zone deals with the vulnerability of the living ecosphere. Now, and that has to do also with the vulnerability of species.
Yes.
A lot of species die out.
Yes.
Yeah, and how would you feel if the wasp would die out someday? It's an emotional question, you know, or also a question of kinship or whatever.
Well, luckily, these things happen on a very, very long time scale. So unless we interfere, most of these species are not likely to disappear for a very long time. Certainly not in the lifetimes of individuals. Maybe in the lifetime of our species, but maybe even not that. So, of course, we can do something to exterminate. We have exterminated so many species of birds and frogs and even insects. If that happens, I would really feel very, very, very hurt and very sad. And, maybe even more sad than losing a family member, because you're losing the whole species here. It's not one wasp. So if the Rhopalidium marginata becomes extinct in my lifetime because of human activity, for me that would be worse than losing any human being close to me. Worse than. But if we don't do anything, then in course of time, it will change. And very often, species don't just disappear. They evolve into something else. They give rise to something else. That, in a sense, would be a happy occasion, right? It's like having grandchildren. So it's a very nuanced question, and it depends on the context. So we, for example, because of our own researches, we take a lot of precaution to make sure that we do not deplete the populations, even in Bangalore. So we don't collect from the same place. We don't collect all the nests in a given place. We sometimes, if we need only the adults, we leave the nest behind. If we need only the nest, we leave the adults behind. At the end of the experiment, we create conditions for the wasp to rebuild a nest, start all over again. So we try very hard to make sure we are not responsible for a decline in the population. But it's very easy to neglect these and create a decline. It's very easy for us to create that critical zone where things will become extinct. Certainly it's very easy for us to make sure that these wasps are almost non-existent in Bangalore. Very easy. It worked very hard to do the opposite.
What is their contribution towards ecology?
These wasps and other social wasps are all carnivorous. Their main food is other insects. And to that extent, they maintain a balance of other insect populations. And if these become extinct, then other insect populations will go up, which will include pests and other things that we don't want. Every species has a role in the chain, in the network, to maintain the final balance. And you can maybe destroy one, but if you destroy certain minimum number, then the whole system will just sort of collapse. And I think it's not just these species, but that's the role that these kinds of species play to maintain a balance. But actually, one of my former students is trying to even use these artificially for pest control, for controlling pests in agricultural crops. So he places these boxes around the fields and monitors how much pest, and there is some evidence that they actually help.
Today is your last day at IISc or at CCS?
No, it's not my last day at all.
Okay.
In fact, today is nothing special.
Okay.
It just continues. What is going to different between today and tomorrow is from tomorrow I will have even more time for research, because I will have no administrative duties.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is no other difference.
But
so I will not be signing checks anymore,
yeah,
but I'll be signing research papers.
which is good.
That's the only difference.
But there is a slight difference. And I just want to talk about time. Since yesterday on this chair we had a geologist from Earth Science Lab.
Yes.
And he's doing research on the inner core of the Earth.
Yes.
And on the magnetic field of the Earth. And what I found surprising, and that he said Mars once had such a magnetic field and it disappeared sometime, and that's why most probably there is no life on Mars, because the Earth needs the magnetic field in order to be protected and in order to set up something what we could consider the critical zone. And then he said it could disappear, the magnetic field, within 20,000 years, which is, compared to the whole lifespan of the Earth, a very, very short time. So what do you think, how long do you think in advance for the human species and for the Earth, what is a reasonable life or time span to think in advance? 1, 2 generations, like we have children, grandchildren, maybe great-grandchildren. Again, this is not a question which can be answered. How long will we be responsible for Earth?
At least as long as the Earth has existed before we came, which is 4.5 billion years. We must be responsible for at least for the next 4.5 billion years, I think. Nothing less than that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.